In this authoritarian government, there's only one party, the party, and they will stay in power by any means necessary. If you have any intent to change that, the result is death, or worse, submission. This is the world of 1984, and this is not just a book, it's a warning. And today, we're going to be talking about what this warning really is and what this book is about. So first thing first, what exactly is 1984? So 1984 is a book, of course, written by George Orwell, the same author of Animal Farm. And in this book, it's about a government that is in complete and total control. And this story follows a government worker by the name of Winston Smith, who slowly loses trust in his government and begins to recognize its flaws and its oppression and tries to rebel against it. So that is just the premise of 1984. I don't really want to get into spoilers right now. Later on the line we will, but I'll warn you when we do. So right now, I actually want to tell you the ways that this corrupt government in the book stays in power. And they do this in 3 ways, which is actually their slogan. And their slogan is, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. So war is peace means violence, freedom is slavery means surveillance, and ignorance is strength means propaganda. So let's go one by one, and let's start with propaganda. So propaganda is a very important tool that the party uses. But first, let's define what propaganda is. So by definition, it is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote a particular point of view. So one of the simplest ways that I can explain to you how they do this is that they actually have a brand called Victory Brand, which are very cheaply and bad products that they just kind of stamp a victory label on it. This brand is kind of a way to keep people in check and to always be thinking about the war, always be thinking about victory. And I think it is very symbolic because on the outside, it's proclaiming victory and has the whole brand of victory. But in reality, it's really poorly made and terrible. And when talking about propaganda, you always need a symbol. And the party symbol is Big Brother. And this is described as kind of just like a symbol for the party because everywhere you look, it says Big Brother is watching. So our main character works in a government facility called the Ministry of Truth, when in reality, all they do is lie and spread more propaganda. But we'll get to that in a second. And this is only one of 4 ministries. We have the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Love, the Ministry of Plenty, and the Ministry of Peace. And you know where I'm going with this. None of them mean what they actually say. The Ministry of Truth lies, the Ministry of Plenty enforces poverty, the Ministry of Love tortures, and the Ministry of Peace is war. And this contradiction brings me to a very cool concept in this book, and it is called Newspeak. So in simple terms, Newspeak is a new language based in English that the party created in order to minimize self-expression. And in this new language, there's a word called doublethink, which doublethink, as written in the book, means the power of holding 2 contradictory beliefs in one mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. And the name of the ministries and their slogans are perfect examples of this. War does not mean peace, but somehow war is peace at the same time. And I think the party uses this as just a means to have widespread confusion and also submission. Because if people can accept 2 contradictory things, then they can accept anything. And this leads me to my next point, their strongest propaganda device, which is changing the past. So this is actually what our main character does. He finds old books, old newspapers, and he crosses stuff out and just rewrites it. And this has a lot of implications. So probably the number one reason why they do this is so that the party can look good. A great example of this is that the party always wants to be right. So if they can change the past, they can just say that they predicted everything and that they're always right. So if you can change the past, you can do anything. And this quote from the book perfectly sums up the concept of changing history. The past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, the lie became the truth. And we'll talk about the implications of changing history later on when we get into spoilers. So for right now, just think about it. And on to our next part of the slogan, we have freedom is slavery, which means surveillance. So one of the tactics of the party, which goes hand in hand with surveillance and propaganda, is called a telescreen. So basically, it's a TV that has a built-in camera in it, and it cannot be turned off. So it just blasts you with propaganda all day long, all night long, while the camera's on and constantly watching you, which is a very scary concept. But again, I do have a phone, so it's kind of the same thing. And another way that they have a massive mean of surveillance is that they actually educate the kids to tell on their parents if they have any signs of going against the party. And not just kids, but the adults too. If you see somebody acting out, You better say something or else you're gonna get caught in the mess too. And surveillance doesn't have that many components to it, but it still is a very scary thing. But anyway, on to the last slogan, war is peace, which means violence. So propaganda and surveillance do not work if there is no violence. And how the party makes sure of this is that they perpetuate war. It is somehow always winning, but never really gaining any ground or making any real change. They say that they're always winning, but somehow it never ends. And this is a way to keep people constantly in fear and also to keep patriotism high. But something that is more personal to the people is that missiles are falling on the city every day, every couple hours even. So at this point, you can kind of infer that this could be an inside job in order to keep people in check. But anyway, they also hold public executions so that you know what will happen to you if you decide to rebel. And not just that, but people also randomly start disappearing, which is some of the scariest things that I've ever heard. One day somebody's there, the other day they're not. And the thing is, nobody asks a question. Nobody says anything because this is normal. But you might be wondering, so where exactly do they disappear off to? And we'll talk about that, don't worry. But before we do, this is the point where we're actually going to get into spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, which I highly recommend you do, please go do that. But if you don't mind spoiling, then you're more than welcome to stay. So now let's actually talk about what happens in the book. So again, in this book, we follow Winston Smith, who works for the government making propaganda. And we follow him as he starts to realize how really corrupt and evil this government is, as he finds different ways to rebel. And while he is searching for the Brotherhood, a deep and complex group of people wanting to stand up to the party, or at least that's what they say. Because the Brotherhood's leader, Goldstein, is another way that the party uses as propaganda. And they use this for two reasons. The first reason, it's that it's kind of a way to root out any traitors. So they give you a kind of false hope to tell you that there's hundreds or thousands of, like, an uncountable amount of people that are willing to stand up to this. So it gives you a false sense of hope and you feel like there's a better chance to stand up, when in reality, there's most likely nobody. But there really isn't a way to tell. And the second reason, it's to promote hate, and more specifically, promote hate of the opposition. Anybody who's against the party. Winston gets this false sense of hope that there are people willing to stand up, that he gets kind of overconfident. So he kind of starts to rebel in little ways. So even from the first pages of the book, he starts writing his thoughts down, which I believe is illegal. But not only does he write his thoughts down, he writes that he wants to destroy the party, which is definitely illegal. And another newspeak word that they introduce in this book is called thought crime. So even if you think about going against the party, that's already a crime in and of itself. So due to that word alone, technically Winston is a criminal, which is insane to think about. How a pure thought can put you in jail. But again, that's the power of a totalitarian government. But another way that Winston rebels is through love, because love is prohibited by the party. And I believe they have that because if you love somebody and they disappear, then that would drive you crazy. And if there were hundreds or thousands of people in love and their loved ones disappeared, I'm sure that could lead to a revolution. So everything that could potentially lead to something going against the party's needs, they just directly destroy its roots. And I don't know if Winston thought the party was clueless or just plain stupid, but of course he eventually gets caught. And this is probably my favorite part of the book, when Winston is talking to a inner party member. Just to make clear, there are three classes in this book. It's the inner party, the outer party, and then the proletarians, I think that's what they're called, which is basically like the working people. And Winston stands in the outer party. But anyway, this talk between Winston and the inner party member is some of the most insightful stuff and psychological and philosophical talks that I've ever read. So the inner party member just precisely tells Winston what the party is about. And what they want is power, just power. And Winston keeps asking himself, so I understand how, with propaganda and violence and surveillance, but I don't understand why. Why do they want power? Do they just want to control people? Do they just want... He doesn't understand. And quite frankly, I don't either. But the inner party member just tells him that the party wants power purely for power, which is insane to me. I don't understand that. But I think that is kind of the point. Some people are just going to want power. You can't reason with them. You can't talk them out of it. They will do whatever means necessary to stay in that position. And that is very, very interesting. But one of the other things that I also found really, really interesting is the concept of history and the concept of existing itself. Because there is a point when the inner party member and Winston are talking that the inner party member tells him, "You do not exist," which is insane, right? If somebody walked up to me and said, "You do not exist," well, first off, I'd probably start tweaking because I'm like, who is this random person telling me that I don't exist? But first off, I'd just be thinking they're crazy. Like, of course I exist. We could get philosophical and whatever if we really do exist. But just basically and simplistically, you do exist. But what they say in this book about him not existing is about changing history. Because if he says, you do not exist, except, birth certificates, pictures, people that you know, friends, family, if they exist, then you do exist. Even if you die right now, you would still exist in their memories, and you would have existed, right? But the thing is, the party can change history. So what if they tell you, you do not exist? We've erased your birth certificate. We've gotten rid of those people. We've gotten rid of pictures. We've gotten rid of everything. You have nothing. No bank statements, no bank accounts, nothing. Then you don't exist. And that is the craziest thing. I literally couldn't go to sleep. I could not stop thinking after I read this book, after I got to that part. Because how is that possible? Like, the only reason that we exist is because of, like, paper trails and the past and documents and people. But if those don't exist, then we don't either. And that is one of the craziest, like, philosophical and psychological things that I have come out of this book for me. Because I think just talking about this, and just the pure power that the party has, that they are able to do this, is insane. And I think it really puts forth to the warning that George Orwell is giving us, that we should not, as the working people and as a human being, we should not let this power go unchecked. So I really don't want to get into politics, because I think it is a very messy area, and whatever I say, somebody's going to be mad at, which I really don't care. But I want people to take this as more of a vague thing for you to interpret, rather than me interpreting it for you, which again, I kind of am, but not politically speaking. But another thing that also really strikes me about this part is that the inner party member tells Winston that when people disappear, they don't just die. They don't want to make a martyr. Because I don't know if you guys have heard this quote, but
a man may die, nations may rise and fall, but an idea lives on.
So even if a person who is probably like a leader or something about an idea, if that person dies, that just makes the idea stronger. The party is not looking to make martyrs. They are not looking to kill people while they still believe their beliefs of going against the party. What they want to do is they want to completely convert you to loving the party. Imagine having these beliefs against like oppression and all this like corrupt government. Instead of getting captured and dying with those beliefs, you have to be like tortured for like months, maybe years, until they make you change your mind. Like Winston, throughout the whole book, right? He hated Big Brother. He hated the party. But the last sentence of this book, he loved Big Brother. And I don't think that is him just thinking about it or him just like wanting to love Big Brother. He sincerely loved Big Brother, which is scary. And I don't know, like I literally can't describe it, because he goes through like months and months of torture to get rid of his whole life's philosophy, right? And ever since the beginning of the book, Winston said that freedom is the ability to say that 2 + 2 is 4. And in this interrogation between the inner party member and Winston, he says, how many fingers am I holding up? And every time he says 4, he hurts him, he tortures him. And he says, I am holding 5 fingers right now. And he does everything in his power. He's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. But he would just torture him until he eventually saw 5 fingers. And he believed he saw 5 fingers. So it would be the same thing as me telling you right now, I am holding 5 fingers. And for you to believe it. That is what the party wants to do. They want to completely control your thoughts and just implement doublethink. For this is 4, But if I tell you it's 5, then it is also 5. He wants 2 plus 2 to be 3, 2 plus 2 to be 4, 2 plus 2 to be 5. 2 plus 2 is whatever the party says it is. That is just horror. That is psychological horror. and it is terrifying to think about that this sort of power can even be remotely true. And so this book actually defied my expectations, because I was expecting this book kind of to be like a guide on how to go against a corrupt government, and being like, oh, if the government does this, then you got to do all these steps, and at the end, we'll overcome the party. And after reading it, I was like, this is such a different experience than what I thought it was going to be. This is not a guidebook. This is not a step-by-step plan. This is a warning. This is what is going to happen if government powers go unchecked and a corrupt government arises. And so what can we actually take away from this book? And some of the things that we can actually learn are what things to look out for when you are looking for a government as such as this, a totalitarian and authoritarian government with surveillance, violence, propaganda. And I think in the present moment, it is hard to recognize those things. And even in hindsight, it might be difficult. But it being difficult does not mean it's not important. And I think the best course of action to combat this type of government is to do your own research and to think about things thoroughly, and don't listen to everything you hear on the internet. Think for yourself. And even if the whole world is telling you that you're wrong, if you do your own research and you think it's right, then that is your opinion and you're entitled to it. And that actually reminds me, one of the quotes from this book, which states that sanity is not a statistic. And I think that quote is truer than anything. Sanity is not statistical. Just because you are one person against the thousands or millions or billions and you are correct, it does not make you wrong because you're in the minority. If you think that 2 plus 2 is 4, but everybody else in the world, 8 billion other people, think that 2 plus 2 is 5, that does not make you incorrect. And another point that I really resonate with in this book is how Winston always talks about the proletarians, which is like the working people. And he says time and again and again and again that the power to overthrow the party is in the hands of the proles. It's in the hands of the working people. And there are 2 quotes from this concept that I really like. And one of them is, why was it that they could never shout like that about anything that mattered? So this is referring to a part of the book where these women are shouting. And he thinks, oh my days, this is when the riots start. This is how we overthrow the party. And he goes over to where the people are shouting, and he realizes that it's just people arguing over like metal pans. And he realizes, like, this is so stupid. Like, why can't they scream about something that actually matters? And that really made me think, because it's like sometimes we scream about like sports and like video games and stuff, we always get mad and there's always controversy and drama surrounding those things. But I think sometimes we also need to focus on the important stuff. And this leads to the next quote, which is, heavy physical work, the care of home and children, petty quarrels with neighbors, films, football, beer, and above all, gambling, filled up the horizon of their minds. To keep them in control was not difficult. And I think these quotes actually go hand in hand. And with these 2 quotes, I think all I have to say is to maintain a balance. This is something that my dad always told me, and it was that balance is pretty much the key to life. I think it's okay to get upset about football and beer and games and whatever, but I think also have a healthy balance between those things and politics, because I know a lot of people say that politics don't matter, but as I'm growing up and starting to get more into that world, I believe that is one of the things that actually do matter, even though it is very tough in that world. Again, I really don't want to get into politics, but I do think it's a very important issue. Whatever side or whatever you believe in, I think it is an important issue that everybody should pay attention to, because politics is the only way that there can be real change. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say. I'm just going to leave you with this. Read this book if you haven't. Don't watch the movie. The movie's horrible, okay? At least the 1984 one. It was actually made in 1984, by the way. Anyway. But yeah, don't watch the movie. Also, most importantly, do your own research. Stay true to yourself. And don't let anybody change your mind. Sanity is not a statistic. I love y'all. and I will see you next episode. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.